The atrocities, the deaths, degradation, the pain. Beggars belief that people can do that to each other.
Hi, my name is John and welcome to the Sepilok Orangutan Center and also the Sun Bear Conservation Center. We're currently here where we are rehabilitating the orangutans and also the sun bear to help them to reintroduce them back to the wild.
We're at the orangutan sanctuary, just about to go in. They're going to feed them at 10. It's all wild and it's all open, but these little guys have been here since they were small, and so they're gradually weaning them back into the forest. But at 10 they put the bananas out, and those that are still hanging around this area come and pick up the bananas to eat before, we hope, within a couple of years or so, they then go back completely into the wild. They also have very tiny baby orphans, and they keep them in a kind of preschool area, and then they have an outside bit, and then they anyway, we'll find out more hopefully and bring it to you.
You get drinks, and it's where all of them gathered together, so it's the best place for them to actually find females. And once they get a female, okay, they would focus on that very particular female. Whether the female likes it or not, she doesn't have a say. Yeah.
Okay,
shall we?
Been in pubs like that.
5 years old, 5 to 6 years old. They're getting comfortable going a bit further from the mother.
John was just explaining that orangutans, unlike monkeys, don't live in troops. They're quite solitary animals. The only time they really live together is when the mother has a baby, then obviously she keeps hold of that baby for up to about 7 years. Of course, once she's been impregnated and had the baby, the fella fucks off and leaves her to do all the work. But you know, that's normal, isn't it? Yeah, so they don't live in troops, and they also don't attack each other. If they meet up, they're quite friendly and then go on their way. A bit like humans. So this is the feeding platform, and we've seen quite a lot of orangutans and various monkeys, and the ranger is there now putting the food out, the bananas for them, and we can see them all around us waiting to come down. They're sneaking up on us from all angles. Amazing things. They've got 4 arms. They don't have legs, they have 4 arms, and they live their entire lives in the trees. So we've just got the mother with her baby here on the feeding platform, but the rest of it is macaques. There's long-tailed macaques and there's pigtailed macaques, the 2 different types. They've taken over, and I've just been told that normally if there are a lot more orangutans here, certainly if there's a male, the macaques don't go anywhere near the food because they're scared of them. But we know that it's the fruiting season, so most of the orangutans are out in the jungle getting themselves a really good fix of all kinds of different foods, not just the same old banana, which is all they get here. And that's good really, because that's what we want. We want to know that the orangutans are making the best of the jungle and not relying so much on the food station.
difference between orangutans and the sun bear is they have to put the area for the sun bear fence around.
The Borneo Sun Bear Conservation Centre is right next door to the orangutan area, but very different. These guys are protected with wire fence all the way around that's electrified because they are extremely endangered, far more than the orangutans in fact, and that's because they have a really bad predator known as man, who kills them for their gallbladders, for their paws and anything else they think they can use the sun bear for. Quite a few of them are killed in the wild, and then the babies taken from the mothers and reared as pets in people's homes. They've been going since about 2008 here, desperately trying to get sun bears back into the jungle, or what's left of the rainforest here, but it's quite an uphill struggle, so we understand. But they're so pretty. They're lovely little animals.
So the little chap we've just been looking at down here, his name is Fulong, which Alvin found very amusing because that's almost my surname. He's also known as Fulong the Popular. Again, very similar to me. He's a very curious animal. He was rescued in 2010. He was taken away from a home that had taken him as a pet and brought here, but he's one of the more popular ones in that he's very sociable. He loves human attention, and apparently John was saying that he likes to scratch himself, which means that he creates a cut on himself and has to go to the vets. And he does this on purpose because he just loves the attention that the vet gives him.
So just had to drop the anchor and sort the engine out later on. What it ended up was a load of gunk in the bottom of the tank that got stirred up in the bad weather in that day. It had filled the primary filters and so starved the engine of fuel. Well, yesterday we rigged up a jury system where we just bypassed everything, had the fuel line coming from a jerry can down into the pump, the fuel pump, and a return line coming off the injectors back to the same jerry can, and steamed 22 miles yesterday on half a jerry can of fuel. I cleaned the tank out last night. Today we're going to flush the line through to make sure there's nothing between the tank and the filters, right back to the engine, and then put it all back together, and I'll fill the tank up first and then get through it, and that's about it. Replace the filters once I've cleared that line.
And you said you got through 2 filters in the last 24 hours or so?
2 filters, yeah. So there was quite a lot of gunk in that tank. The results of it are here. You can see in this bucket. You can see it in the container there.
Yeah.
So I've been told that they call this Black Death. Certainly does me no favours. So that one's the dodgy one, is it?
Yeah, that's right, yep. Yep, so just to explain, the last 20 litres we pulled out yesterday, we put in this one, so this is the sacrificial one, so we want to make sure we don't put that one back in. So what Roy is doing now is what Liz and I try to do every time we haul out. And in fact, the last time we did it, we hadn't even hauled out. It was in Sutra when we had a whole load of Indonesian fuel and sold it to the local fishermen next door and bought a whole load of Malaysian fuel. And during that process, what we do is we filter out the old fuel, well, not in that instance because we were selling that lot. But if we have to do what Roy's doing, we filter it when we take it out and we filter when it goes back in again. So it's double filtered. But of course the key thing is to make sure the tanks are clean, and that's Liz's job because she can reach the corners of the tanks that I can't conveniently. It's a shitty, smelly job, but it's always a good idea to try and keep your tanks clean because that gunk, obviously it can build up over time. It tends to settle down in the bottom corner of your tanks, but as we saw with Roy, because we were going through some pretty rough weather, what tends to happen, of course, is that fuel, it's like a washing machine, gets churned up and down, and it will pick up all those bits from the bottom of the tank and get sucked into the engine. And this is why we are pretty anal about cleaning our fuel, because touch wood, This has never happened to us, and that's because we try and stay on top of it. It is one of those things that I think is probably my worst nightmare, is exactly what happened to Roy, and that is when the engine conks out right at the wrong moment.
I always use this just in case I get an overflow, you know, and it gives you...
That's a good idea, you know, because I always suffer from that problem. So how do you empty your tanks? Well, this is how we do it. There's two ways. You can use a manual vacuum pump, which Mark on Zizi has kindly lent Roy, but also this is what we use, and it runs on 12 volts, and you basically attach a long hose to this end and you drop that in the tank. So what we tend to do is we start at the top of the tanks where the fuel's going to be cleaner and take out most of that diesel, and then at the very last one you have your sacrificial jerry can, and you drop that right in the corner to pick up all the gunk, the jelly and the muck. It's noisy here, isn't it? So lessons learned?
Clean the tank once a year, I think. Don't trust fuel additives, because they've absolutely done nothing. I know that the tank was cleaned 2 years ago, and I've always used fuel additives, but I've never got to the bottom of the tank. I always keep the tank full, topped up pretty much as I can. We've been using filters, fuel filters, as we're taking it in, putting it in and taking it out, but
yeah, it all looked pretty clean, didn't it?
it did, yeah, there was no water. Yeah.
We're going to have lunch at the English Tea Garden, which appears to be either a genuine colonial house or built in the style of.
No, it's genuine.
It's genuine, okay.
It's pre-Second World War anyway.
Okay, looking forward to some nice lunch, sitting outside, cup of tea maybe, English tea. Beautiful manicured garden. It reminds me a little bit of some of those retreats we saw in India.
The area here is focusing on overlooking the view of Sandakan Bay. Yeah, so it's essential for the residents to stay here. And plus, Sandakan used to be a more watery area. That's why the resident is up on the hill.
Well, this English country garden nonsense is all well and good, but what relevance does it have to us? It turns out Sandakan has huge historical importance, not least bearing witness to some of the most brutal atrocities of the Second World War. In 1925, British officer Harry Keith, a keen sailor, was drafted to Sandakan as conservator of forests.
Agnes at the helm, with her hair tied in a favourite red silk scarf, smiles, while Harry, shirtless, bends to light a cigarette before showing the dragon tattoo on his chest as he relaxes beside her, while the ensign behind them flutters in the breeze.
His wife, Agnes, a budding writer, was shortlisted for her memoirs of her time in Borneo, and these eventually became a best-selling book, The Land Below the Wind. Next to the English tea house is Agnes Keith House. This is where Agnes and Harry lived after World War II. Set on the site of an earlier colonial building atop the hill that overlooks Sandakan Bay, it was the first government permanent timber dwelling, and today is a museum in honour of Agnes and Harry. Under the shady trees and modest garden, the house was decorated in post-World War II style and gives a great sense of colonial life during this era.
You may not know who she is, but she wrote this book. She's written 3 books, in fact she's written more, but the 3 books she's famous for, her autobiography, and Land Below the Wind is the first one, of her time living here in Sandakan in northern Borneo. So she was here in the 30s and the 40s, through the Second World War and afterwards. It's supposed to be a really interesting read. I'm going to find out all about her, but the house she was able to live in with her husband is stunning. It's about 100 years old, it's made from local woods, natural colours, big high ceilings, very spacious, huge rooms, but really, really simple and quite typical of those colonial homes that we've seen really from India onwards. And I've got to say that if somebody made me live in it, I think I'd be very comfortable there.
The blot on the history of Sandakan, however, is the 1942 Japanese occupation of Borneo. When World War II broke out, the Keiths, on leave in Canada, were ordered back to Borneo. After Japanese occupation, both were captured and taken to separate prison camps. Agnes's second book, Three Came Home, is a biographical account of her time during that period, and in 1950 was made into a movie. Although the Keiths survived, Sandakan became the centre of one of the greatest atrocities in Pacific World War II. Fearing extensive British bombing, the Japanese moved their prisoners of war inland, which is when the horrors began. To learn more, we visited the Sandakan War Memorial. Set in a beautifully appointed park, it has been created to remember the brutal deaths of over 2,000 people in what became known as the Death March to Ranau.
This memorial park is actually built on the grounds of the original prisoner of war camp that the Japanese held in the 40s, housing 2,500 men in total, the majority of which were Australian, some were British. And we are going to be walking through the park and we're going to see a little bit of what remains. As the Allies began to advance on Borneo towards the end of the Second World War, the Japanese realised that they were vulnerable. They had tried to build an airfield here, but the prisoners worked really hard to do everything they could to sabotage it. Eventually the Japanese decided they needed to move to the other side of Borneo, and so they decided to take all of their prisoners with them in relays. All well and good, but these have been come to be known as the death marches because so many people died on those marches towards Ranau. It did involve actually going up the side of Mount Kinabalu, through marshland, through rainforest, through terrible terrain. The soldiers were already fatigued, suffering from all kinds of dysenteries and various illnesses, and along the way they would die. As they became ill and more frail, the Japanese shot them. But of course some of the Japanese soldiers themselves died because it was a very difficult journey. And I tell you what, on a beautiful day like this, the heat, as you can probably see if you look at my face, is really strong. And the idea of marching when you've not eaten anything or you've not drunk anything and you're suffering from all kinds of terrible diseases, it just beggars belief that even some of them got through, to be honest with you. And as we know, it wasn't just the Australians and the British who died, it was the local people who themselves had undergone a lot of suffering. They were used as labourers, forced labour, to build various structures for the Japanese, and many of them died or were killed doing that job. They worked with the Australians and the British to form an underground unit of men who tried what they could to disrupt what the Japanese were doing, and those that were found out were executed and have come to be known as local heroes. They are listed here, actually. I'll read their names out. Alexander Clarence Leonard Funk, Jemadar Ojagar Singh, Sergeant Abin, Ernesto Lagan, Heng Ju Ming, Wong Mu Singh, Felix Axona Jr., Matasup Bin Gungao, some of the heroes who laid down their lives to try and help the people who were here and to try and help the Allies so that the Japanese couldn't construct a runway here. Well, I've just walked around the museum area where there's a little AV show, and very well done information on what happened. Defy anybody to read it and not be moved. The atrocities, the deaths, degradation, the pain. Beggars belief that people can do that to each other. Why did they do that? Why did they feel it necessary to treat other human beings like that?